Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Very well, thank you. And today is Election Day.
Yes.
The world is turning on Election Day. Major events will be decided.
Exciting.
And once again, it's the most important election in our lifetime. But we're not all that old, so that's not many elections.
That's right.
But for me, I have to go way back to find the most important election in our history. But anyway, that's said all the time, and it is important. There will be signals sent. But for it to be the most important, and the question is that we want to address is, does the election really matter? Will it make a difference? It matters. You can't say it's irrelevant, because there will be messages, but there's going to be people that will read too much into it or totally ignore it. But that's what I want to talk about today, is how significant this is going to be and how it is. Because at this moment, I don't think there's anybody who knows exactly what's going to turn out. And there would be a big difference on the short run about if the Republicans get wiped out and they overwhelmingly take over the House. That's a big deal. And if they'd pick up some seats in the Senate, it's not likely to happen. You know, that's not going to be the case. But I think that when you talk about the effect of elections, I sort of break it up into two parts. The immediate effect. You know, if the Democrats take over tomorrow, I think the markets would reflect it, and they'd start thinking all kinds of things, and the market could go down sharply, more regulations, and all. Then the dust would settle and say, well, they don't have the Senate, and they don't, have the presidency. But I think there's immediate reactions will be, but I think it's the long-term reactions, and that's where I sort of come down on the side of saying, another election. I think the momentum and the trends have been going in the wrong direction for a long time. We make our effort to try to change opinions on economics and trade and war and monetary policy, but the momentum is so strong. This election is not going to be enough to all of a sudden wake the American people up and say, what we need to do is change the direction in a significant manner. It's the way this country is going.
Yeah, and our old colleague Jeff Deist at the Mises Institute had a great article out today where he talks about really the essence of this election is manufactured outrage. These are the issues. Manufactured outrage, Kavanaugh, the Me Too movement, the caravan, all of these sort of manufactured things to get people excited and hopefully get them to the voting booth. But as he points out, nothing on foreign policy, nothing on the Fed, debt, spending, nothing on spying on us, civil liberties, or even state power itself. Those things are off limits. The real things are off limits.
That's right. It made me think about 1968, because that was a big year for an election, and Nixon was running. There were riots in the street, a lot more than what's happening today. And people were very, very outraged over the war. The war was a big issue, and I think in a serious manner. And I think that's one of the reasons that Nixon won that election. But the similarities, of course, is that there's a lot of people angry and upset, even though there's not as much outright violence in the street. There's still a lot of violence going on. But it was intended to be a referendum on the Vietnam War. But what happened? Nixon was a disaster. The war expanded. Mm-hmm. Over 30,000 Americans were killed after the election of 1968. So do they even listen? Do they even care? Are the problems, like Jeff says, manufactured? Well, then if there's a referendum, if the people who really run this country want to ignore it, they just go ahead and ignore it. So this is a big problem. But the places where very similar to what Jeff was talking about. You take an issue that most of our viewers would agree is very, very important, and that's the Federal Reserve System and the income tax. But they didn't deal with that. Matter of fact, the only time the Federal Reserve came up is when there was more or less a concession that interest rates should go down. Yeah. Trump took that position. He's not even running right now, and the Democrats didn't complain. I don't think the position would be any different between the two parties, no matter what was said, because it isn't even brought up, which means that we wouldn't want the people thinking about this, even though it might, as we believe, really be the culprit in the wiping out of the middle class. That's a big issue. They didn't talk about the wiping out of the middle class, but that might be where all the resentment and even though the policies so often are similar, the resentment is for real because not all segments of the economy suffer the most. Maybe the Republican beneficiaries are doing better than the Democrats and the middle class, but overall, there's a lot of people who are still very unhappy, but they didn't touch on that. I mean, that's why I don't think the election per se, regardless of which way I go. Now I know there'll be some of our viewers may disagree with us on that they consider this much bigger deal. But having looked at the elections that I've viewed in the past, if it's really a significant message, by golly, I think the deep state and the neocons are just going to totally ignore it.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Democrats have had 2 years to prepare for this election. Trump was elected. He's certainly a divisive figure in America. 2 years they wasted on the fake Russiagate story. It's interesting, about a week ago, all of a sudden they shut up about it. Not another word. They were reduced to a couple of days ago, a couple of hours ago, begging the Greens to drop out of the race to help the Democrats. So, Trump really has dominated the narrative in this race, even though, as you point out, he's not running. But the Democrats have not come up with a platform with the program other than elect us, we're not Trump. Trump's a racist, we're not Trump. That's basically it. And is that enough to get people excited? Like you say, what if they had a program about the Fed hurting the working class? What if they'd actually took a different look at the caravan and instead of talking about open borders, talked about the working class and how they might be hurt by this kind of immigration?
Yeah, and instead of that nonsense, what they talked about on Kavanaugh and the fake stories told about him, because I believe a lot of that was just made up. But the Democrats were lousy in pointing out some of the shortcomings of Kavanaugh. I mean, here he's a supporter in the Bush administration supporting torture, and is not a protector of the Fourth Amendment. But that isn't an issue because the Democrats didn't want to make an issue. That is not, they disagree with that. But if they can politicize something, that is all that they do. This year, you could have made war the issue because, of course, the exploding deficit and the middle class being pushed behind. And how long have we been in war in the Middle East, in this war that we support in Yemen? I mean, but I don't ever remember it being mentioned. Are the Democrats against that war? Are the Republicans against that war? There probably are some, we know a few, but basically that is not to be the issue. But, and the American people probably don't care either, and they get led by the nose. But the point I want to make is that, even if they come on an issue and there's an overwhelming vote in favor of it, the control in this government is so strong that if they choose to ignore it, they can. They can and they will. So it's going to take a lot more. That's why I think momentum is a big deal. Political momentum, economic momentum. I mean, they could have had a referendum on the balanced budget amendment. Well, neither side care about it, but if they did, it's not, it couldn't be done under these circumstances because too many people would riot over the fact that something could be cut because you're saving for tomorrow. If it's an individual, they have to cut back or work harder and pay their bill. But in a country that has a reserve currency of the world and they have a Federal Reserve, they can take care of all the special interests until the deficit gets too big. Some of us think the deficit is getting too big. Somebody could have run a campaign just on deficit financing, how detrimental it is, not only for the economy, to our liberties. But we didn't hear about that, and therefore we can be certain that the conditions aren't going to change because of this election.
And what about running something? President Trump has tied himself to the Saudi Crown Prince, to Saudi Arabia as a close ally. It's been a huge embarrassment for this past 3 weeks. What about doing something about that? What about campaigning on the immorality of our relationship with Saudi Arabia and Yemen? Can't do that because the complex needs to keep selling that stuff, and they're also funding both parties.
You know, trade has been a big issue in the last year or two, you know, with Trump going away from free trade and going toward the use of tariffs and sanctions and threats. And yet the issue really doesn't come up, other than the fact there are tariffs out there, but there was no real resistance to it. I mean, did we have any candidate in the country that said, you know, tariffs are bad, tariffs are taxes, the wrong way to go, they're going to be detrimental within a certain length of time, there will be a price to be paid, and the people in this country, if we put on tariffs, the middle class pays for these tariffs? No, you never heard that one time. So there was not, if there's going to be an indirect referendum, Trump's trade policy is okay. You know, put on tariffs and keep threatening people, and the use of sanctions, and that's how we're going to win friends and influence people. But quite frankly, I think that kind of stuff is going to have blowback someday, economic blowback, and of course direct blowback as well.
And I mean, Trump's saying, I mean, on the tariff issue, the Dems could have come up with tariffs hurt the working class. I mean, the working class are buying things on the lower end. A lot of those things are imported from China. A tariff is going to raise the price and hurt these people who are struggling. Why not make that case as well? You know, there's so many missed opportunities. As Raul Mayer wrote in today's Automatic Earth update, he said, not being Trump is supposed to be the Democrats' ticket to ride. Well, is that enough?
Well, you know, another issue that is talked about a lot, and there's confusion, and it's difficult to sort it all out, and that is the issue of privacy and social media. I mean, that to me is a big issue. But somebody could have run on this and say, you know, the government is very, very secret, and they tell a lot of lies. But the people don't have any privacy left from the government or from this pseudo-capitalism in social media, that the people have no privacy whatsoever. And at times I think, well, most of them don't care or they don't know about it. But privacy is supposed to be the bedrock of a free society. You're supposed to have privacy, and it's in the Constitution. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Openness is supposed to be what the government is supposed to do. But it's twisted, and nobody wants to talk about it. The people don't have privacy, and the government has all the secrecy. Why don't we say we need openness in the government, and we need the people to get their privacy back again? But that certainly wasn't discussed in the issue, because I don't think there was a disagreement.
And under Trump, there's more surveillance of American citizens. There's more deep state, even though he's elected to drain the swamp, as we did on a show the other day. He's given a lot more money to the intelligence services, the intelligence agencies, to raise the swamp, more swamp. But here you have an opening for the Democrats to talk about, as you point out, civil liberties, privacy, things that they should care about. But here you have, I noticed this morning, I was on Twitter, the Dems are all in for the pro-deep state. General Mike Hayden, remember the former CIA director, all-time pro-Hillary, hates Trump. He's tweeting out today that he's urging people to vote for CIA candidates who are running for different offices. Those are the best people, he says, to run things. There are several of them. One of them is in Virginia, I think running against Dave Bratt. But several CIA candidates are running. He says, vote for the CIA.
But there's certain words that you weren't allowed to use. You know, political correctness. You've got to be careful. But the one word that's just agreed upon with everybody that was running this year, and that is, don't ever say the word liberty.
Yeah,
liberty,
that's a four-letter word.
It is subversive, and that means that you're against the government. Yes, we're against all the government illegal functions that they do. Everything the government does that's opposed to the Constitution, yes, we're opposed to that, because it is the government, basically, that undermines our liberties. But the real problem, though, is the people and the politicians don't defend the liberty. So the authoritarians, and I put them in the same category. I think they're conservative authoritarians, you know, with privacy and war and all these things. And the Democrats are authoritarian, and they're going to do the same thing. They're going to agree that the purpose of government is not to protect liberty. It's to take care of society, make sure there's nobody falls through the net. You know, this sort of thing, protect everybody from cradle to grave, which they can't do unless the only attempt is that they make it has to be done at the undermining of liberty. But that's too esoteric. Nobody wants to hear about that. But I was very pleased when I was running for office that a lot of young people did care, and that's what I liked about it.
And Jeff does point out in his piece today how few people in the 16 election really made a difference. You're talking just a few small thousands, so this is not a big landslide of ideas. But Jeff does capture, I think, in his piece, going back to it, what you were just saying. And he says, both parties accept the federal government as the chief organizing principle for American society. And then, so with that accepted, politics is just a fight for control of that apparatus. You know, and so once you buy into that, there's no need to disagree on other things.
Yeah, and some people don't understand when I say, you know, people don't understand, but there's too much bipartisanship in Washington. They say, no, there's this fighting going on. But the fight isn't over the important things like philosophy, freedom versus slavery, paper money versus gold money. That's not the debate. The debate is, I look at it is who gets to pass out the loot.
Yeah.
You know, they all believe that we take it from the people and deficits are good, and if you don't have enough money, you print the money, and it's who's going to control it. But they want to know, see, Democrats no longer have a position where they're against war and against the military-industrial complex, but they vote for this stuff, but they all have stuff in their districts, and none of that would change. You know, it didn't change under Obama, and he was the peace candidate, you know, but nothing changed. The perpetuation of this aggressive foreign policy continued. It to me is a real tragedy.
Well, that's a perfect segue, if you don't mind, into my concluding statement, which is a quote. And I'll tell you who it is in a minute. We talked about it earlier, but this is a quote based on what you just said, actually. The argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideas and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea acceptable only to doctrinaire and academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical, so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. That's Carroll Quigley from Tragedy and Hope, and I think that captures it pretty well, Dr. Paul.
Well, he put it together, and he's had some controversies surrounding him at times, but basically I see him as an individual who did come out and finally speak the truth to a lot of people and what really ran the government. And that's really what we're dealing with now. The government is too big, it's monolithic, hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats carrying guns to enforce all these laws, thousands of laws and tens of thousands of prisoners, and people just go on and they say, well, we have to have an election. The election turns out what they're thinking about is superficial and not dealing with the essence of what we're dealing with. And I think we should go back, even though there were some imperfections at the beginning of our country, there was a pretty good division between those who believed in liberty and limited government, and this is something that we have lost. And I think it's very simple for us to understand if we accept the notion that the purpose of government is to protect liberty, not to run our lives, not to run the economy, not to police the world. And that means it would be very limited. Yes, if the government were very limited, there would be a maximum amount of freedom for individuals. Only one rule: don't ever hurt anybody and don't lie, cheat, or steal. That would bring about peace and prosperity, in my estimation. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.